Putin was just interviewed and he said that he was forced to take Crimea and that he hopes that he won't need nukes to complete the special military operation. Hello, my friends. My name is Darren Gerdes. I'm just a professor trying to provide context in the war in Ukraine. Here are 5 big stories for today. So, in this interview, Putin said that Russia hasn't had to use nuclear weapons in Ukraine and hopefully won't need to. He claims that Russia has enough forces and means to finish the special military operation without them. He also claimed that he was forced to support Crimea and Sevastopol in 2014, calling it the right decision. Why? Because Russians were being persecuted there and he had to go intervene, just like he had to in the Donbass. Despite sanctions, he says Russia made strong progress. He admits Russia wasn't prepared for the special military operation, hoping for a peaceful resolution in Donbass, but claiming that the other side acted differently, because they were preparing for this all along, and he wasn't. He also insists that Russia was deceived by the Minsk agreements, as if he wasn't really gearing up and he was taken by surprise when he invaded across the Belarusian border. This narrative has been pushed by Russia for years, and this was a significant interview, 25 years of Vladimir Putin, that sort of thing. Okay. In other news, Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov says that Russia expects Kyiv to take concrete steps to de-escalate the situation over the holidays. Not now, not before the holidays, where they could just call a ceasefire anytime they wanted, but right now. The goal of the ceasefire, he says, is to test Kyiv's readiness to seek ways to a lasting peace. Of course, they're not ready to have a lasting peace right now. Okay. Next big story, visit Russia more than once every 3 months. In Lithuania will now strip your residence permit if you do that. The Baltic nation implements tough new restrictions while Hungary relaxes entry rules. 2 vastly different approaches to the Russian threat on the EU's borders. Yeah, the Lithuanians remember that after they were enslaved by the Soviets, they were then re-enslaved by the Nazis, who then the Soviets re-enslaved them, and then the Soviets deported many of them to Siberia and killed many of them along the way. They don't want to go back to that experience. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov authored a foreword to a Kremlin-linked book that accuses Lithuania of historical falsification and Russophobia. There's a reason why some maybe Lithuanians might have some Russophobia, as you call it, or dislike for Russia, and it might have to do with the deportations that took place when the Soviets conquered Lithuania. Senior Kremlin officials continue to set informational conditions that could support military operations against Lithuania and other NATO states by advancing narratives that deny the sovereignty of Lithuania and other former Soviet states. Here, Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov authored this foreword to a book entitled The History of Lithuania, which Foreign Relations publishing arm of Moscow State Institute of International Relations published on March of 2025. Lavrov's foreword claimed that the national policies of Baltic countries, including modern Lithuania, leverage falsified historical narratives to stimulate Russophobic and other anti-Russian sentiments in their domestic audiences. But they don't need to stimulate this. There's a clear history that would lend itself toward maybe not appreciating the Russians like Lavrov does. Okay, here we see this. Poland, Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia, Czechia were so eager to join NATO as soon as they had a chance. The reason is extremely simple. All these countries were invaded by Russia. They know what Russian occupation is like, and they simply don't want it to happen again. There's a reason that they did this. It wasn't that NATO was moving east. It was that these countries were running toward the west. They were running away from Russia and its sphere of influence. Now, Kazakhstan's in this mix as well. Kazakhstan just banned entry to Russian deputies and propagandists. Well, that's interesting. What happened here? The reason for the ban is insulting and threatening statements against the country in public. A Kazakh official confirmed the information about the existence of a special list of people who were denied entry into the country. These include Kremlin propagandists and even State Duma deputies from Russia and historians. The Moscow Times reports that this man here previously stated that after Ukraine, Kazakhstan could become the next problem for Russia. Now, I saw this today and I watched it. I hadn't seen this video before. It's an old video from 1993. The person that posted it said, every time I watch this video, it gives me chills. In 1993, Ukrainian volunteers in Georgia explicitly stated that Russia would someday invade Ukraine if Russian imperialism was not destroyed immediately. And it seems like the prophecies come true. Now, on the Guzima Riverfront is held not only between Georgia and Muscovy, but also between Ukraine and Muscovy. If Georgia survives, Ukraine will survive. That is why we're fighting here. I believe that the victory will be ours because justice must always prevail. It cannot be that this Moscow empire is eternal. We will break the back of the Russian bear. We came here by the will of our hearts. This small bunch of Ukrainians who came here, respect for the Georgian people and confidence that here on Gumista, we must finally slap the paws of the Moscow bear. What is the point here? Today they are here. Tomorrow they'll be in Ukraine. If we fail here, we will not be able to win here. We mean our enemy is Moscow. We do not hide it. If we don't shed our blood now, then our descendants will shed their blood. If we do not stop Moscow's aggression, here our descendants will have to do it. Wow, how about that? Yeah, that was in 1993. Former states that were associated with the Soviet Union, they understand. Now, Jay Bao is an Irishman who just seems to love Russia, doesn't. He said this, when the Soviets invaded Czechoslovakia in 1968, it took 500,000 troops to contain a far smaller country than Ukraine, with no intention to resist militarily. The economic, political, civil, and military cost of an invasion of Ukraine would be too high. It simply won't happen. He posted this on 14 February 2022, just 10 days before it actually happened. But what's interesting here are the numbers. 500,000 troops to contain a country the size of Czechoslovakia. So let's look at Czechoslovakia. Czechoslovakia is 127,900, almost 128,000 square kilometers. Ukraine is occupied by Russia in about 120,000 square kilometers. So the Czechoslovakian population wasn't fighting back and they needed 500,000 to do it. And the Ukrainian population is fighting back, and that's why they need far, far more than that to do it. I don't think Russia can do this without having to maybe about double its army. I don't think it's possible. Now let's turn our attention to the next big story. In Washington, the Immortal Regiment March took place. This happens in Moscow and other places in Russia. It's first time in 6 years. Russian media called it a march through the American capital, one of the central themes of the proxy conflict in Ukraine, which participants predictably do not view as a war of Russia against Ukraine. They call it a proxy war. But here they are. They're walking through the streets in Washington. Now listen to what you hear in the background. So here they're playing their music. They're walking through the streets in Washington, D.C. Listen to the background. Do you hear "Never Again"? They were yelling, "Never again, never again." Here's another image of it. And here they are walking through the parade. So it's not a large crowd. So as you can see, it wasn't a large crowd. They could go through it very quickly, but yeah, I mean, it's kind of disturbing that that's happening. Now, I'm a free speech guy. They should have the free speech to be able to do that. And there should be plenty of other people like you and I that would have the free speech to say, do you understand what you're doing? This is wrong. Russia is killing. Never again. Never again means never again. Okay, here's a reporter talking about it, and listen to the background.
У Вашингтоні 6 травня відбулася хода безсмертного полку. Росіяни
Do you hear them saying shame on Russia? Yeah.
зібралися ходою і пройшли від Білого дому до меморіалу Другої світової війни.
Okay, so that's what was happening in Washington. What else was happening in Washington? Well, Trump was being interviewed, and when he was asked about his economy, he said this.
When does it become the Trump economy?
It partially is right now. And I really mean this. I think the good parts are the Trump economy and the bad parts are the Biden economy.
He really does mean that. And in another part of the interview, he was asked about peace negotiations, and he said this.
Signed a minerals deal with Ukraine. It's a sign, it seems, that the United States is invested in Ukraine's future. The Secretary of State told me this is a very critical week. Are you any closer to reaching a peace agreement between Ukraine and Russia?
I hope so.
How would you
I do
characterize
believe
it?
we're closer with one party and maybe not as close with the other, but we'll have to see. I'd like to not say which one we're closer to, but we did do a deal for the American people that was good. We were able to get rare earth. You know, the Europeans are getting paid back. They have a loan. We didn't. Biden just gave him $350 billion. He has no idea where the money is.
Again, he's back to that $350 billion figure. I don't know where he's pulled that from.
What happened, and at least we'll, in one form or another, get our. I don't feel so foolish. And remember this: this is Biden's war. This was a war that was never going to happen if I were president. This is a horrible, horrible war, and I get to see shots of soldiers through, satellite that are just so terrible. 5,000 soldiers are being. Look, 5,000 soldiers a week on average are dying. They're not American soldiers. But I want to solve the problem. They're Russian soldiers and they're Ukrainian soldiers. And if I can save 5,000 souls, I just love doing it.
How long do you give both countries before you're going to walk away?
Well, there'll be a time when I will say, okay, keep going, keep being stupid.
When does that come? Are you close to it?
Sometimes I get close to it and then positive things happen. Okay?
What's the red line for you? At what point do you say, that's it, we're walking away?
Well, you'll know. I mean, there'll be a time when I may say that. And if I do, there may be something I can't, maybe it's not possible to do. There's tremendous hatred, just so you understand. Kristen, we're talking tremendous hatred between these two men and between, some of the soldiers, frankly, between the generals. They've been fighting hard for 3 years.
But what caused that tremendous hatred? See, that's what we're not addressing. We're acting as though there's this side and that side, and they're both equal. And no, there's a big difference between what one side is doing to the other and the other side is fighting back against. All right. So the other day I showed you Ben Shapiro interviewing Zelensky and then coming back and really talking bad about Russia. Like he's an American conservative who's a pretty well-established figure. Well, Shapiro is now willing to debate Tucker Carlson about Russia, Israel, etc. And he said that he'd do it in a neutral format. Tucker, however, is only willing to debate Shapiro on his own show, perhaps so he can edit. I don't know. But yeah, I mean, there is a rift within the Republican Party, and Shapiro is picking up some of that mantle for the conservatives and willing to challenge Tucker Carlson. Here are other Republicans. This is Republicans for Ukraine at GOP for Ukraine. If you are a Republican and support Ukraine, you might want to check this out. Here are Republicans demand stronger support for Ukraine. I point this out because really the Democrats, I'm a Republican, but the Democrats have been carrying all the weight here for Ukraine with only a handful of Republicans along the way, and that needs to change. Listen to this.
I'm a lifelong Republican.
I'm a conservative voter.
I'm a former Trump voter.
I support aid to Ukraine.
Helping Ukraine defend itself.
It's an investment in American security.
If Russia succeeds in taking over Ukraine, they're not going to stop.
It's going to embolden China
to take over Taiwan.
Yep. All that true. That's my sentiment as well. So if that's you, this is something that you want to check out. All right. Last couple of things. Trump, I think, knows what he's doing when he creates something like this and puts this out there. He doesn't mind that now the New York State Catholic Conference has just come out and said there's nothing clever or funny about this image, Mr. President. We just buried our beloved Pope Francis, and the cardinals are about to enter a solemn conclave to elect a new successor of St. Peter. Do not mock us. I mean, but he just wants to be the story that badly, I guess. I'm not sure exactly why he would put this out on Truth Social. Obviously, he didn't dress up this way. Obviously, it's AI generated, but still, like, it just seems like bad form. And then there was this. He put this out this is on the White House's page. A happy May 4th to all, including the radical left lunatics who are fighting so hard to bring Sith lords, murderers, drug lords, dangerous prisoners, as well as known MS-13 gang members back into our galaxy. You're not the rebellion, you're the empire. Okay, if you don't know why that's being posted, today is May 4th, as in May the 4th be with you, Star Wars reference. May the mass times acceleration be with you. It says on my shirt, it's May 4th. Okay. Darth Putin responded to this. The evil empire arose out of trade wars. That's true. And the dark side uses red lightsabers. Okay. Yeah. They do use red lightsabers. I had to look it up just to check, but apparently there is some symbolism to the color of the lightsaber. Look it up for yourself. You'll find that it's true. Somebody should have checked that before they put this up on the White House website. All right, my friends, that's all that I have. Thank you for your time, the likes, the shares, the subscribes, and thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.